stance at the moment.
We get live reaction now from former U.S. Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. Welcome to the program. Now, John Bolton there was pretty tight-lipped after the meeting, but what were you able to read into about how the meeting went with what he did put forward?
Well, I thought it was terrible. All he did was threaten people and assume that we control the world and we control everything. One thing that caught my attention was getting Iran to take out their troops. Now, that's a reasonable request, as long as the request is any foreign nation that has troops in Syria that have been uninvited should all leave together. That's what the problem is, this picking and choosing that we decide and say, yes, he can have troops in here, not the other ones. But no, I think the threats and intimidation and the sanctions, it's just a penalty on the people. They never hurt the government. They just give incentives to the government. So I think this whole notion that sanctions are a weapon, and now we as a country, America's threatening even more severe sanctions. And I think that's the wrong way to go. I think sanctions are an early rehearsal for war.
Continuing with what you mentioned about Iran, he said that the two had discussed a variety of ways for Iran forces to leave Syria. What might that mean?
Well, I have no idea, but they're always negotiating deals and negotiations. But I think my position strictly is that the only way I can see it logically from a libertarian position is that people who aren't invited into a country shouldn't be there. So anybody that's there that has not been invited, so if somebody asked me opinion or if I were in government, I would just say the people ought to leave. And if it were my own government, which it is right now, my advice has been for a long time, don't go in and leave as soon as you can, because it doesn't help anything and it just leads to more trouble and it prolongs the war. I mean, look how long we've been in Afghanistan because of a similar situation. So I have no idea what he's talking about, working a deal with the Russians on how to handle the Iranians. But this whole thing that we have said that our goal, our stated position now, as stated by Bolton, and just by the way, Bolton doesn't speak for all the American people. He speaks for the neoconservatives. But the policy now is the goal is to seek that Iran cannot export 1 gallon of fuel. Now that's absurd. It's just wrong, and it's just going to lead to more trouble. And then other countries, will be sanctioned as well. And if Russia participates in helping Iran, then we've been bold and make these wild statements that, quite frankly, we shouldn't. And I'm not sure we could carry out all the threats anyway.
Now, the specter of Russian meddling came up again and apparently kept the two from signing a joint statement. How long do you think that that's going to stay a sticking point between the two countries?
I think for a long time. I don't think they're going to magically come to their senses and that we change our policy. We're very, very much engaged as interventionists. And then we have the issue of NATO moving eastward and not following through our promises of keeping NATO away from the borders of Russia. And these things just add up. So I don't expect any magic, which is very, very difficult for some of us to totally understand, because we don't think our president really at heart endorses all these positions, of antagonism with Russia, and yet the people he has hired do. And I think that sort of came up in that discussion that the president and Bolton get along very well, and I guess they do. He hired him. But there's been a lot of us who had always been hopeful because Trump has said things favorably and has worked with Russia in the past, and we'd like to just see more of us here in this country to emphasize that, which means that, yes, it wouldn't be a bad idea for Iran to leave Syria. But I think a good deal would be that America could leave Syria as well and mind our own business.
So do you feel like the topic of Russian meddling often overshadows more important topics that should be addressed in these type of meetings?
Oh, yeah, I think this whole thing about Russia meddling, I think every country gets involved to some degree about what's happening in other countries. To what degree, I don't know. But I would consider how much we have done, especially since World War II, how many elections we've been involved in, how many coups that we have participated in, including Ukraine. I would say in comparison, this current Russiagate, event going on right now, that is just minuscule as far as I'm concerned. I think people have just blown it way out of proportion, and it's a distraction from some of the more important issues, but it certainly is there. I think it's been really stimulated by our political system here that surprised and shocked everybody that a guy like Trump won and beat the insider and beat the chosen person, that was Clinton. And they can't get over this. They're hysterical about it. And they even now, they take a position which they generally agreed with. Liberal Democrats used to be more on the side of libertarians about non-interventionism, but now they're obsessed with this. They're obsessed with the fact that Trump won. They're going to do anything to try to get rid of him. And I think, in a way, Trump may be in a box because he, might have a different position, as I suggest. At the same time, it's really hard for him to placate both sides. And I think that's impossible. And that's why I've always taken the position that you take the position of what a nation that believes in liberty should do and practice that and get along and talk with and trade with as many people as you can. I think that is what leads to peace and prosperity, which is the goal of my foundation. Peace and prosperity is done by talking to people and diplomacy and trading with people, not threatening people and spending hundreds of billions of dollars on weapons that we don't even need. And if you compare what we spend and compared to what the rest of the world is spending, we're wasting a lot of money, and someday we're going to have to pay for it, and then I'm going to have my way. We're going to have to back off for financial reasons, just as the Soviet system had to back away because they just couldn't afford it.
Bolton reacted to one question of a reporter asking whether or not he thought that the president was a security risk by dismissing it and saying, have a little faith in the American people who elected him president. Why do you think the media continues to zero in on those types of questions and those alone, more or less?
Well, yeah, now it was Bolton, I believe, that said this, trusting the American people. What he's talking about is trusting in what he says. But what the neoconservatives say isn't what the American people voted for. They voted for Trump, who was an independent populist and a non-interventionist to a large degree, and that's why he even got libertarian votes. So that's where the disconnect is. That's where it's real hard to figure out what's happening, what's going on. But this statement by Bolton that the American people know exactly what they want, and he's speaking for the American people, will tell you what, I know a lot of American people that aren't very happy with the neoconservatives, and I think they're on the defensive, and it's a mixture. Neoconservatives infiltrate both parties, and therefore sometimes, what the Democrats do and the Republicans do behind the scene, and that is to maintain the empire. That's the goal of the political system that we have, and this other stuff is just distraction. It's distraction on who has the power, who has the purse strings, who makes the decisions, and that is very, very important, and these fights are real. But when it comes down to it, they don't have any major disagreement on deficit financing, central banking, and the welfare state, and all these issues. And matter of fact, there's very little discussion, real discussion, on whether or not we should practice interventionism overseas. A few of us called libertarians, we don't believe in interventionism overseas. What we want to do is we want to be engaged overseas, but we want to be engaged in friendly pursuit of commerce.
Former U.S. Congressman Dr. Ron Paul, thank you for your time and your comments.